Dzień dobry. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure and honor to host this conversation today. I'm joined by Valerie Jarrett, who's the Chief Executive Officer and a member of the Board of Directors of the Barack Obama Foundation. She's also a Senior Distinguished Fellow at the University of Chicago Law School. She was a senior advisor to President Obama for all 8 years of his presidency, making her the longest-serving senior advisor to a president in history. She's the author of the New York Times. Yes, well deserved.
Thank you.
She's the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Finding My Voice, and has received numerous awards and honorary degrees, such as the Times 100 Most Influential People Award. Please welcome Valerie Jarrett.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
Valerie, welcome to Impact Conference. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Marta. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Nowadays, you more often goes by as the longest-serving and most trusted advisor to President Obama, but there's so much more to your own rich career. It involves many zigzags. You took a major leap in leaving private practice and joining a legal team at the City Hall in Chicago. Could you talk us through what has driven your moves when you took on new roles in private industries and then public administration?
Yes, so I have now spent about half of my career in the private sector and half of my career in the public sector. I began practicing law at big law firms in Chicago, and I did that for 6 years until I just couldn't stand it any longer. I'm sorry to anybody out there who's practicing law at a big firm, but I didn't find it sufficiently fulfilling. And after I had a baby, quite honestly, I wondered, would my daughter ever be as proud of me as I am of my mother, who has been a working mom for her entire life. And so I started thinking about, well, what else can I do? And Mayor Harold Washington, who was the first black mayor of Chicago and who I had knocked on doors in his campaign in 1983, had just won re-election. And a good friend of mine said, why don't you consider working in his administration, take your legal background, and your clients will be the citizens of Chicago. And the words, Marta, that he said I'll never forget were, you'd be a part of something bigger and more important than yourself. And it just struck a chord with me, coupled with being really miserable. And so I took this leap of faith. And from there, I practiced law for 4 years. Mayor Daley was elected. A couple of years into his term, he made me his deputy chief of staff. We'll come back to that in a minute. I ran the Department of Planning and Development, and then I decided it was time, with the thought of tuition rate, college tuition in the background of my mind, to go back to the private sector. And so I joined a real estate company that was doing a lot of work with the city, redeveloping large tracts of land that had previously been public housing and building mixed-income communities. And it was part of my job when I was the planning commissioner that I enjoyed the most. And so I had the opportunity to continue that work from the perspective of a private real estate development company. And then in 2009, my very, very dear friend was elected president, and so I joined his administration. And then after that, I thought, well, I probably will never have a job as close to as wonderful as that job. And so I wrote a book, and I was on the speaking circuit and serving on several boards. And a couple of years ago, he said, how about coming back and running the foundation? And I had been an advisor to the foundation, but had really not been thinking about running it day-to-day. And now I think I have the best job in the world.
Well, that's a big and very rewarding statement to make. You fast-forwarded through your many different roles, and all of them were big in their own respect. How did you get comfortable with taking risks and managing stress? The reason why I ask is because I think this audience is a mix of private and public sector, often considering changing roles, but I think one thing that unites us all is this constant pressure, questions of what to prioritize, deprioritize, and like how to manage yourself so you can create the room to deliver in the role.
Well, managing risk and learning to absorb the stresses are very hard. Experience makes it better. The longer you do it, the more comfortable you get. But I'm never completely comfortable. I mean, I'm always pretty terrified, actually. And I think that's good. It's what makes me work harder, be over-prepared. And I think in terms of prioritizing what's important, you have to decide what's your agenda. And inevitably, in all of your jobs, as certainly were mine, you can't set the whole agenda because there's all this incoming that you have to manage as well. And so figuring out how to manage the incoming while you're still affirmatively pushing through your agenda means that your schedule becomes really important. And it's not the kind of thing that you necessarily learn in business school, and I didn't go to business school, so I surely didn't learn it there. But you do have to figure out how to maximize your time and how to delegate effectively so that you're not doing things that are not uniquely required of you. And there's certain things that as leaders you have to do. But if you can figure out how to assemble a team around you, and I always went about trying to find people much smarter and more competent with strengths that complemented my weaknesses, and I was always very acutely aware of what my weaknesses were. And so assembling a team around you that can support you in this effort, I think also helps you figure out how to be as efficient as you can with your time. But it takes a deliberate, continuous effort of prioritizing what's important to you and what you best can do to move the needle, and then leave the rest to other people.
Everything you have just said is just a masterclass of leadership. And in your case, as you just said, it was also tangled with friendship, a very special friendship that played such a big role in your own career, but also, and I won't hesitate to say that, in the world's affairs. How did you build a relationship with President Obama and the First Lady that didn't just mean agreeing with them and with the president in the first place every step of the way, to at the same time maintain friendship and provide constructive advice?
Well, so first of all, I've now known the president and former First Lady for 32 years, so a very long time. I met them in 1991 when I was trying desperately to recruit then Michelle Robinson, long before she married Barack Obama, to come and work with me in the mayor's office. And look, I was so impressed. She walked in my office. I can still see her. She was about 27 years old, and strong handshake, commanding presence. Didn't mention anything about her Princeton undergrad, Harvard Law School. She told me her story. And I remember to this day being so struck by her openness of, growing up on the south side of Chicago, working class parents who had not gone to college but valued education and invested in she and her brother, and asked only of them that they aspire for excellence and for service in whatever direction that would take them. And she also shared with me that her best friend and her dad had died within the previous year, and that it had such a profound impact on her appreciating the finality and finiteness of life and the importance of leading a purposeful life. And it resonated with me because I felt much the same way thinking about my daughter and how I wanted to do something to make her proud. And so we clicked, and I offered her a job on the spot. She said, "I'll get back to you." And when she got back to me, she said her fiance did not think it was such a good idea. So I said, "Well, who's your fiance, and why do we care what he thinks?" And she laughed the way you all are, and she said, "Well, his name is Barack Obama, and he started his career as a community organizer, and he's really not so sure about me going into government, and he wants to meet the person who would be looking out for me. Would you have dinner with us?" And it was kind of an odd request, right? Would you have dinner with my fiance? And I'm trying to give her the job. But wisely, I was curious enough, and I really wanted her, so I said yes. And that dinner changed my life, and I got to know him for the first time, and he asked me about my story, and I asked him about his story, and we found out that we had a lot in common, and that I was born outside of the United States. He lived outside of the United States. He was born in the United States, by the way. I just like to clear that up wherever I can. But those experiences that we both had taught us a lot about walking in a room and feeling comfortable with whoever's in the room, because we both grew up with people from all walks of life and different geographies and backgrounds, but yet you could find something in common. And if you learn that as a child, Marta, it really stays with you. And the other thing that we both shared at that dinner was the fact that if you haven't lived outside of the United States, sometimes you take what we have in the United States for granted. And he lived in Indonesia, I lived in Iran, and so both of us had seen poverty, the likes of which we hadn't seen in America, lack of freedom of expression and religion, and a lot of the other advantages that we have in the United States. But the most important thing, I think, in terms of our time together in Washington in the White House was we both agreed that the United States is an amazing country. But hey, guess what? It's not the only country on earth. And you can learn a great deal outside of your shores. And I think that that helped inform his approach and mine to foreign policy. And so I say all this as by way of background, that by the time we got to Washington, we had the basis of a very strong friendship. I had friendship both with President Obama and with Michelle Obama. And so it's a lot easier when you walk in a room with that history behind you of having worked together and played together and vacationed together, and you know each other's core values and you know each other's, what true north, that when I would walk in a room and disagree with him, he didn't question my motives. He knew that I was only there to make sure he made the best informed decisions possible as president. That was my job as an advisor. And so it was really easy to disagree with him, and he loved it when people disagreed with him. In fact, one time we were arguing, just the two of us in the Oval Office, about something, and I don't know, I was tired, and I just kind of said, okay, fine. And he said, oh, don't give up. Don't stop. I was just getting into it. And I was like, okay, I go back to arguing again. And so I think having that type of a leadership style allowed him to really analyze issues from all sides before making a decision, and make the most informed decision that obviously impacted not just people in America, but people all over the world. And so I understood my role was to push him to make sure he was hearing from all perspectives, and not just from me, but bringing in a whole range of people so that people who were most directly affected had a voice in the decision-making process.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Like, there's also a certain intimacy to our relationship that is exposed to so much public scrutiny. That's very valuable for me and for the audience here. You mentioned all around the world, and there's always so much happening globally, and that was certainly the case when you served with President Obama, but the time since you both left office has been also marked with really difficult, demanding challenges that put leadership to test, from the pandemic through global instability, and something that mostly concerns the audience here, the unjustified and unprovoked Russian attack on Ukraine. When you work with leaders today through the Obama Foundation, could you tell us what traits of character you're looking in leaders, and did you come across anyone through your work and you thought, this person could be the next Obama? Are there specific careers you're keeping an eye on today?
Well, so first of all, the Obama Foundation, we have leadership programs currently in Asia, Africa, and Europe. We're launching a program this year in the United States. We have programs at Columbia and the University of Chicago, all gold with the goal being to help foster the next generation of leaders. And it makes me light up because they have so much incredible potential. And President Obama often says, as he meets with those young leaders, and he was in Chicago yesterday meeting with a few of the ones that are working there locally, he says they're so much smarter, they're so much better connected, so much more savvy than he was at their age. And so we're not just looking for the future Barack Obama, we're looking for Barack Obama 2.0, 4.0, 12.0. And we see them everywhere. And they have similar qualities in that they understand that leadership isn't about them, it's about service. And they're really focused on how they can take their skills and take them to scale so that they can have a positive impact on more people. And we don't tell people which issues to care about, we just try to help them have the skills that they need, the organizational skills, the communication skills, the resilience skills, the determination and the grit, and the best evidence-based practices to be able to affect more people in a positive way. And not only do we help the leaders with what we have learned in the process of life's lessons, but we connect them with one another. And one of the real joys of the program is to see our alumni stay in touch with each other and partner with each other and share what they're learning on the ground all over the world together. We are building the Obama Center on the south side of Chicago, my hometown, from after we moved back there, and about 2 miles from where I grew up, right by where Michelle Obama grew up. And we hope it's going to be an economic engine for Chicago, but a beacon of hope for the world. And that people from all over the world will either visit us physically there or participate virtually to hear from us, but to learn from each other. And our goal is to create this sense of optimism where you can bring change home to your community and get the skills that you need and the relationships you need to make the world a bigger place. And that sense of hopefulness and optimism that I see in the young people from around the world is what makes me confident that we do have better days ahead.
You already used one of the key words of the President Obama's campaign and time in office, and that was change. And I'd like to, just for the last question, before you proceed to a panel, ask about another very important buzzword, hope. It resonated globally, way beyond the boundaries in the US, and I think everyone in this room feels that what we really need today is hope. Where would you advise us today to look for hope?
Well, I say look for hope with the young people. The younger generation, they are hopeful, and they have had to experience what my generation didn't. I mean, I came along after World War II, and certainly before issues like, you said, a global pandemic, where so many young people missed those precious years in school that we took for granted. Dealing with climate change, something that is very acute and aware in the hearts and minds of young people. Civil unrest that we're seeing around the world, war that we're seeing around the world, right close to here. And so they have a lot of stresses in their life and a lot of challenges, and yet they still manage to have hopeful spirits. And so tapping into that and helping them really unleash their full potential is what gives me hope. And I think, Marta, you and I talked about this earlier, hope and change, which were our key foundations of President Obama's campaign and his presidency, those words are hard. And I think sometimes people thought of them as kind of light and fluffy. When you have hope in the face of adversity, that is hard. You have to find within yourself this well of strength and resilience to determine that you are going to be hopeful and recognize your responsibility to be a part of the greater good. And I think that where people lose hope is where they think there's nothing they can do. And there's something each and every one of us can do to try to make this world a better place. And the other thing I learned, particularly in Washington, is there is a strangled hold on the status quo. People who are in power love it and do not want to exceed it. And so you really have to have a sustained effort over time to see change happen. And that's why issues like voting are so important to me, informed voters. But we as just ordinary people can also make such a huge difference. And so I think hope and change are found in each of us. And that's how good things happen, is when ordinary people come together to do extraordinary things.
We couldn't finish on a better note. Thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.